Hello everyone, it's Jana, and today we're going to be delving deep into the world and crimes of Canada's most infamous couple, and one that terrorized the people of the Greater Toronto Area for a very, very long time. We are going to be talking about Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, or as many people like to call them, the Barbie and Ken killers. Before we get started, I do want to warn you guys that this video is going to touch on some pretty sensitive topics. These two did some very terrible, unimaginable things. So this is a warning, especially to my younger audience, that today we are going to be discussing some more sensitive topics. Without further ado, let's get into this. I really do think that the face of this duo is Paul Bernardo, so let's talk about him. Paul Bernardo was born Paul Kenneth Bernardo on August 27th, 1964 in Scarborough, Ontario. As you guys know, this place hits very close to home. I'm from Toronto, so this literally happened right here. It's actually pretty insane to think about. Paul was born to his parents Kenneth and Marilyn, and his father Kenneth had a pretty concerning past. He is said to have been extremely abusive to the entire family and to even have assaulted multiple girls, including his own daughter. This is obviously extremely terrible and is said to have been the reason that Paul's mother Marilyn was extremely withdrawn during Paul's childhood. She was supposedly so depressed that she actually spent most of her time in the family's basement because she just could not bear the abuse from Kenneth, and she could not watch him abuse her children. It's safe to say that Paul's childhood was not easy whatsoever, but what's interesting is that many people say that he actually looked very unaffected by everything that was going on. He is actually described to have been an extremely happy and a very gentle, kind child. He was honestly described as the perfect child by many people because he was just very smart and very polite and very kind to people. However, behind that facade of smiling and being a polite, perfect child, there was a darkness growing within him from a very, very young age. On one occasion, when Paul was 16 years old, he got in a very bad argument with his mother Marilyn, and the fight escalated so much to the point that his mom suddenly told him that he was actually not his father Kenneth's child, and that he was actually a result of an affair that she had with a completely different man. So you can imagine, in just 1 second at 16 years old, Paul's entire life came crashing down. He discovered that his own father was actually not his father at all, and he really did not take this good. I mean, this really took a toll on Paul. Now, this is absolutely insane to me, but Paul's father, Kenneth, was aware of his wife's affair, and he was actually completely fine with it, which I find very bizarre because he's often been described as a very aggressive and violent man. So I do wonder why he was okay with his wife having an affair. To me, it seems that it could potentially be that he just wanted to have leverage over Marilyn and Paul and the daughter, of course, so that he could get away with abusing them and kind of like blackmail them. Now, the reason that I brought up this incident about Paul discovering that Kenneth isn't his actual dad is because it was a very crucial incident, I think, in his childhood. After he found out about this affair and that he was a result of the affair, his attitude towards his mother completely changed. From this incident on, Paul always acted extremely disgusted by his mother. He would yell at her and call her names and call her a slob. He would really just degrade his mother any chance he could. And then around the age of 16, he started developing a habit of looking into his neighbors' windows. He would go around his neighborhood looking into people's homes, trying to catch women undressing and changing. And he really loved doing this, but over time he started feeling like it wasn't enough. Just watching them was not cutting it for him anymore. There was this darkness within Paul that he just kept suppressing and suppressing, and it seems that the more he wanted to suppress it, the more violent and aggressive these tendencies became. Paul was relatively successful in suppressing all this weird behavior in his formative years because I'm pretty sure he knew that his fantasies were wrong, and he tried his best to hide his fantasies, but he did intend on making them true. Paul Bernardo studied and graduated from Sir Wilfrid Laurier Collegiate Institute. He also attended University of Toronto, but I'm not sure if he graduated. And then he got a job at Amway, which is an American multi-level marketing company that sells health, beauty, and home care products. Everyone absolutely loved Paul. Everyone at school, everyone at work, all of his friends, like he was just a popular guy. He was said to have been the life of the party, really out there, really charismatic, and working in sales and especially in the environment of this company, it really had an effect on Paul. He developed a little bit of an ego and he got super into those like how to get rich fast books and would listen to motivational speakers about how to get to the top. Basically, he was just becoming kind of a douchebag. Him and his friends would actually use techniques from these books and motivational speakers to pick up girls in bars. And Paul was pretty popular with the girls. He had multiple girlfriends in his life, but there was a commonality with all of his relationships. The relationships would always be perfect at the beginning. Paul would be their Prince Charming. He was kind and intelligent and gentle and the perfect boyfriend. Over time, that perfect boyfriend persona would sort of disappear and he would get more possessive and more controlling and more violent, to the point where most of his relationships would end up being extremely abusive. And then suddenly, in the spring of 1988, news broke out that there was this predator roaming the streets of Scarborough. This unknown man was supposedly going around and just attacking women from behind and pulling them into isolated areas only to further assault them. These attacks would usually happen to girls who were walking alone at night, so the authorities went on TV and told people to be really careful. They urged everyone, especially young girls, to stick together, to stay off the streets at night, and just be wary because somebody was going around and attacking girls. This was just an incredibly scary situation for the entire community, and what was even scarier was that a whole year went by with no suspect in custody, and during that year, the attacks would just get progressively more and more violent. It's almost as if him getting away with the crimes fueled his passion for them even more, which is just so disturbing. I can't even fathom. Now, to most girls, Prince Charming is not a guy with violent, dark tendencies, but to one specific girl, this dark and violent side was actually attractive. And this girl's name was Carla Homolka. Carla Homolka was born Carla Leanne Homolka on May 4th, 1970 in Port Credit, Canada, to her parents Carol Homolka and Dorothy Sager. Now, her childhood is said to have been very turbulent as well. Her father is said to have been a little bit of a drinker. Well, actually, a bit of a drinker. He would drink and then the parents would fight and then Carla would have to comfort her and her siblings, and it was just a very tough childhood for all of them. Growing up, it's said that Carla loved animals. It was one of her biggest passions. She is said to have been very intelligent, very smart, very beautiful. She was very popular in school. All her teachers absolutely loved her, but what's interesting is her classmates said that she was actually particularly bossy and they didn't really like that about her. During her high school years, Carla went through sort of like an edgy, wild phase, and she was going out a lot. She was dating a lot of boys. She was partying, experimenting with substances. She was just like a wild girl. Now, this is super random and I don't know if it's true or not, but there is a rumor that there was an incident where Carla threw one of her friend's hamsters out of the window, which, if that's true, oh my god, that is absolutely horrible and really doesn't align with her whole I love animals story. Again, I don't know if this really happened, but yeah, it's really freaking weird. However, Carla apparently did really have a passion for animals, so much so that she actually got a job at a local pet shop. Now, working here actually led her to a pet food convention that was being held in Toronto. It was taking place at the Howard Johnson Hotel on October 17th, 1987, and it was at this hotel that 17-year-old Carla Homolka met 23-year-old Paul Bernardo. Now, allegedly, as this convention was coming to an end, Carla and her coworker wanted to go and get some drinks, like in the lobby bar area, and as they were hanging out having drinks, Paul Bernardo walked in and Carla and Paul immediately locked eyes and sparks just flew. Paul was said to have been extremely charming, so he went up to Carla, he started chatting her up. One thing led to another and they ended up staying there and talking for hours. They hit it off instantly, and that very same night, Paul went back up to Carla's hotel room and they engaged in intimate stuff. I want to clarify, the age of consent at the time in Canada was 16, so it wasn't illegal, but it was still like super weird and creepy. Now, by the time that Carla and Paul began dating, there was already 3 attacks that happened in the Scarborough area, but Carla really never suspected it to be Paul because he was just the perfect boyfriend to her. He was constantly showering Carla in gifts and spoiling her, and he was really good to her at the beginning. It's said that Carla's family also loved Paul very much, and their relationship was overall going very well. That is until 1989 when Carla graduated high school. So Carla graduates high school and she's just sort of planning her life out, thinking what she's gonna do next. And her friend said that around this same time, she started expressing that Paul was becoming verbally abusive towards her, and she was generally complaining that the relationship just wasn't the fairy tale that it once was. However, it wasn't uncommon for Paul and Carla to have these little fights. It was a pretty toxic cycle for them. They would always fight and then make up, and then Paul would show up and give Carla a gift, and then they would forget about it, and then they would fight about something else, and it was just always this terrible cycle of arguing and fighting and then making up. However, later that same year in December, the couple took a trip to Niagara Falls where Paul Bernardo got on one knee and asked Carla to marry him. And she, of course, said yes. This was such a dream come true for the two of them. I mean, Carla ran back home and told her entire family, and everyone was so excited. I mean, Carla was engaged to a guy who her parents believed was smart and intelligent and ambitious and had a bright, beautiful future ahead of him. He really seemed to be the perfect fit for their daughter. Everything seemed to be going pretty great for them, and they ended up setting the wedding date to the spring of 1991. And while their relationship is progressing and they're falling in love and planning their wedding, the police are trying to catch this Scarborough guy. I mean, who is going around attacking girls? They are trying to figure it out. So the Scarborough police brought in an FBI analyst who concluded that the suspect was most likely young, very intelligent, and had light hair. And on May 29th, 1990, they released a sketch of what they believed the possible suspect may look like. This poster was everywhere in the GTA, every magazine, every newspaper. I mean, everyone and their grandmother knew about this sketch. And that's when a couple of Paul's friends were like, that sketch kind of looks a little bit like our friend Paul Bernardo. And one of his best friends actually contacted the Toronto Police Department and told them, listen, I could be wrong, but like my friend looks a lot like the guy in the sketch. At the time, police did take note of this and continued their investigation, but as months went on, a lot of people were starting to come to them saying, hey, like look into Paul Bernardo. This sketch looks like Paul Bernardo. The name Paul Bernardo just kept coming up. So obviously they're like, we have to look into this guy. So they actually brought Paul Bernardo into questioning and even asked for a sample of his DNA. Surprisingly, Paul was actually very cooperative and he agreed to give the police a sample of his DNA. However, at the time, they had collected so many DNA samples that his sample ended up sitting on the shelf for a very, very, very long time. This was a very big flaw that I think really slowed down the investigation. However, we do have to keep in mind that DNA technology was way less developed back then and also way slower. They had hundreds of samples to go through, and at that time they just couldn't have known that Paul's was gonna be the one. Now, after this police interrogation, Paul picks up and moves from Scarborough to St. Catharines to live with Carla and her family. I don't know if it's because he got scared because of like the police interrogation or what it was, but yeah, he decided to move pretty fast. So Paul and Carla are now living in St. Catharines, and suddenly the crimes completely stop in Scarborough. And then they start popping up. Can you guess where? You guessed it. They start popping up in St. Catharines. I feel like Paul was starting to feel a little invincible at this point because he was just getting away with everything. I mean, the police are very clearly looking at you and you decide to move to like get away from them, but then you continue your crimes. I just think it's very stupid thinking on his part, to be honest. Living in St. Catharines was actually amazing for Carla and Paul because they could save money for potentially buying their own place in the future. And it wasn't an issue because Carla's entire family loved Paul, including Carla's younger sister, Tammy. Tammy really loved Paul and she really looked up to him like an older brother. But what no one knew was that Paul's dark fantasies did not exclude Tammy. He actually really liked her. One evening, Paul actually decided to open up to Carla and tell her that he had feelings for her younger sister. And Carla's instant reaction to this was fear. Carla became scared that Paul was gonna leave her for Tammy. Her love for Paul was almost obsessive to the point where she could not lose Paul to anyone, not even her sister. So somehow, Paul convinced Carla to not only allow him, but help him assault her younger sister in an effort to not lose him. Carla and Paul devised a plan, and on December 23rd, 1990, after Carla's family went to bed, Carla used her knowledge and access to sedatives due to her field and crushed up pills into Tammy's drink. This ended up sedating Tammy and completely knocking her out. After this, they both assaulted her, and then suddenly Tammy started to vomit and choke. Carla and Paul both panicked and ended up calling an ambulance. Unfortunately, by the time the ambulance got there, Tammy had already passed away at just 15 years old. Obviously, they were heavily questioned, and one of the concerns by the authorities was that Tammy had a burn around her mouth, and this burn was actually caused by Carla holding a chemical cloth over her mouth. Somehow though, to the police, they were able to explain it away by saying that they gave Tammy carpet burn by trying to drag her closer to them to help save her. Somehow this explanation was enough for the cops, and they said Tammy died of natural causes at just 15 years old, which is ridiculous and freaking insane. There was absolutely nothing natural about Tammy's death. I mean, you can see it from a mile away. I don't know what they were thinking. But somehow Carla and Paul got away with this. I don't know how. Carla's entire family was absolutely devastated, but they never even for a second suspected any foul play. They all believed that Tammy might have just had a bit too much to drink that night, took it too far, and it just ended tragically. I mean, no one even had like a slight suspicion of their involvement, which again blows my mind because like when I read about this, like the first thing I think is like, did they do something? Soon after this incident, Carla and Paul actually saved up enough money to move into their own 2-bedroom house. It was located in Port Dalhousie near St. Catharines. Fun fact, my aunt was actually their neighbor while they lived here, and she actually said that she spoke to them on a couple of occasions and they were like super normal, likable, charismatic people. Little did she know they were freaking killers. Obviously, moving into their own home afforded the couple a lot more privacy, which really kicked Paul's abuse up a notch. It was getting to a point that Paul's abuse was not only verbal anymore, it was starting to get physical. And on multiple occasions, Carla felt like she needed to get out of the relationship. However, Paul used Carla's involvement in Tammy's death as blackmail. He basically told her straight up that if she were to leave him, he was gonna go to the police and tell them everything. I mean, this man is just an absolute villain. I hate him. On June 15th, 1991, Paul Bernardo offered a cigarette to 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, who was walking home alone from a gathering with her friends. When she approached his car, Paul grabbed her, threw her in the car, and drove her back home. When he got home, he told Carla that Leslie was a gift to her from him, which is like so twisted and so messed up. Carla and Paul ended up keeping this poor girl captive for 24 hours, assaulting her repeatedly before finally taking her life. Carla and Paul recorded this entire thing, and the footage has obviously never been released, but the transcript has, and I've read it, and it's just absolutely terrible. I have to say, Paul and Carla are probably the most evil people I've ever heard of. Like, they're just terrible. Now, in order to dispose of Leslie, they put her in concrete blocks and then disposed of her in Lake Gibson, which was a lake that was near their house. And then on July 29th, 1991, the two of them got married. Yes, they got married as if nothing ever happened, which is absolutely crazy, but they did. However, the universe worked its magic that day, because on that exact same day, while they were getting married, a fisherman actually came across Leslie's remains. Her remains being found was absolutely all over the news. People were terrified. They were so confused as to what was going on, what was happening to these girls. Police investigated for over a year and even brought in the same FBI analyst from the Scarborough cases. And initially, he said that he saw no reason why Leslie's case would be connected to the Scarborough cases. It's really crazy to see how slow crime cases move in real life. Like, for all of these developments to happen, it was like months and months in between, which gave Paul so much time to commit these crimes. Now, after the whole lake in the body fiasco, Paul was getting extremely cocky because he was realizing that he actually was getting away with these crimes. He wasn't gonna get caught, so he was just gonna keep doing it. He actually told Carla to hit up some of Tammy's old friends and tell them to come to their house. They would end up sedating and assaulting all of these girls, but the girls would actually end up waking up and leaving in the morning. They would record everything that would happen, but the girls themselves would have no memory of what happened. They just would think they just hung out with their friends, because again, Carla would sedate them so heavily. All of these assaults were recorded and put into Paul's growing collection. On April 16th, 1992, Paul and Carla went on a drive with the intention of finding a victim. They ended up successfully luring 15-year-old Kristen French into a church parking lot where Carla asked her for directions and Paul quickly grabbed her and threw her in the back of the car. Kristen was reported missing very quickly, and very quickly witnesses started calling in saying that they saw her talking to two people in a Camaro. So then authorities and the news plaster this picture of a Camaro everywhere, telling people that it belongs to the suspect. Turns out Paul actually drove a gold Nissan, not a Camaro, and the witness got it wrong, and the news and police made it public without fact checking, and now everyone had the wrong car, which probably bought Paul and Carla even more time to commit their crimes. Now, Kristen's body was found on April 30th, 1992 in Burlington in a ditch near a cemetery. And then in January of the very next year, Paul ended up beating Carla up so bad that she actually needed to seek medical attention. I really think this was the breaking point for Carla. She was done with Paul. I mean, he really hurt her very bad. She had 2 black eyes. She had a broken rib. I think this is the second time where the universe plays its magic in this case, but coincidentally, around the same time, Paul's DNA sample comes back as a match to the Scarborough attacks. And instead of going to Paul, police decided to go straight to Carla. And I think this was a perfect strategy because at this point, she was so fed up with Paul. She was done with him. She was gonna break up with him, which I think made her more likely to speak up against him and kind of spill the beans. After this police interrogation, she went home and just confessed everything to her parents, including her involvement in her sister Tammy's death. Her parents immediately told her to go and get a lawyer, and that is exactly what Carla did. And once Carla got a lawyer, she basically just spilled the beans about everything that happened. She made herself look like the victim, though. She said that she was manipulated, that she suffered from battered wife syndrome, and she ended up getting a plea deal. If she were to testify against Paul in court, she would get a reduced sentence. Now, this is exactly what Carla wanted, so she took that plea deal and testified against Paul in court. Carla was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter, set to serve 12 years. She was sentenced on July 6th, 1993 for her involvement in the crimes against Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. She did her time in the Kingston prison for women, and then she was released on July 4th of 2005. Like, literally, she was just unconditionally released from prison, and now she's a free woman. Apparently, she changed her name and moved to Montreal, and yeah, she's just completely free, which absolutely blows my mind. This girl is a killer. She needs to be behind bars forever, in my opinion. Paul was found guilty of absolutely all charges and got life in prison and was taken to Kingston Penitentiary, where he is on lockdown 23 hours of the day, which in my opinion is 1 hour too little, because honestly, screw this guy. He is so messed up. Paul Bernardo has absolutely no chance of parole or release and will die in prison as he absolutely should. I'm really passionate about this case. It really angers me, and it's a very confusing case. I mean, why would a woman help a man just perform such horrible crimes? Was it love? Was it lust? Was it obsession? Was she really manipulated? A lot of things go into this case, and I really want to hear your guys' thoughts, so please let me know down below. What do you guys think? Do you think Carla should be a free woman, or do you think she should still be behind bars? Do you think she was just as guilty as Paul, or do you think Paul was kind of the bad guy in this whole story? Today's video was definitely a tougher one, but I really hope you guys enjoyed. I wanted to take the time to delve into a case that is a bit more complicated and complex, and I really hope you guys enjoy the longer videos. If you do, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hello everyone, it's Jana, and today I'm here to discuss an extremely bizarre and very weird case that really left me feeling quite confused. So I thought, what better thing to do than to share it with you guys, because I know you guys love these weird stories. And you guys, this is a true story. Like, this is a crime case that is 100% true, and it just blows my mind. And if you don't already know what I'm talking about, we are going to be talking about a man by the name of Anatoly Moskvin and his very odd passion for turning the deceased into dolls. Yes, you heard me right. Anatoly was born on September 1st, 1966 in the 5th largest city in Russia as an only child to his parents Elvira Moskvin and Yuri Moskvin. The city where he was born was also where he spent most of his life. Anatoly was a very quiet kid, but he also showed signs of incredible intelligence from a very young age. His parents themselves said that they always felt that he was way more mature than his classmates, so much so that he would spend most of his time at recess just reading or teaching himself languages. I think by the time everything went down with Anatoly, he had taught himself like 13 languages. Absolutely insane. This guy was very, very smart. But Anatoly himself says that from a young age, he also felt an extreme fascination with death. He would often wander around cemeteries with his friends as a schoolboy, but while it was just like a fun, scary childhood thing for his friends to do, for Anatoly, it was much deeper. He really liked being in that environment of a cemetery. He loved knowing that he was with the dead. It's very bizarre. He said that he felt a feeling of peace and happiness walking through a cemetery. And I think this fascination comes from an incident that he had very young in his childhood. This incident took place on March 4th, 1979, and I think is ultimately what derailed Anatoly's entire life. So Anatoly says that on this particular day, he was attending a local village on a school trip, and somehow he had ran into a couple of men who had either taken him or coerced him, I don't know which one, into following them. So Anatoly ends up following these two men, and they end up leading him to a funeral of an 11-year-old girl by the name of Natasha Petrova, who had passed away as a result of accidental electrocution or something like that. But Anatoly did not know this girl. He did not know these men. He didn't know anyone at the funeral. But he alleges that once the whole funeral was done and he was still there, all the adults forced him to go up to this girl's body and just sing to it. I mean, just imagine the trauma that he must have experienced so young. Terrible what these people did to him, honestly. But unfortunately, it gets way worse, and this part makes me so angry for some reason. I don't know what it is. Now, Anatoly says that after this whole singing thing was done, the mother came up to him and asked him to go up to the girl and give her a kiss. Now, immediately, he said that he started crying and saying, no, I don't want to do that. That is super scary. Like, he was very traumatized. However, for some freaking reason, these adults grabbed Anatoly and pushed his head down into the girl to kiss her. And it gets even more crazy, believe it or not. After they traumatize him by forcing him to do this, the mother takes out two brass brass rings from her pocket, gives one to Anatoly, and puts one on Natasha's finger and says, "You two are now married and bound forever." Guys, this is absolutely insane, but this kid was genuinely convinced by a bunch of adults that he was now married to a dead girl. I do want to clarify, this entire story comes from Anatoly himself. It is very possible that he embellished some of the details of the story or even completely made it up. I guess we'll never know that, but again, this is according to him. And if this is true, it's just absolutely insane. Anatoly says that after this incident, he began dreaming of Natasha very frequently. At first, Anatoly was fine with it because he just thought it was, from the whole experience that he just had. But eventually he realized Natasha would just keep coming back to his dreams. She was in his dreams every single night, and eventually she started trying to convince him to practice black magic. And when Anatoly would say, "No, I don't want to practice black magic," she would get insanely upset with him. He was really starting to feel tormented by her, so much so that he eventually went to his parents and said, "I have trouble sleeping, I'm having nightmares," and they ended up taking him to a child psychologist who ended up prescribing him sleeping medication. Now, I don't know why nobody looked into what kind of nightmares he was having or why they were bothering him as he was so young. I don't know, I just feel like people should have looked into that a little further. Anyway, so Anatoly is prescribed this medication and he goes home, he takes it, and he goes to bed. But he ends up dreaming of Natasha again, and she ends up telling him that the only way she will ever leave him alone is if he brings her the tooth of another person, who then she will go and torment instead of him. And somehow Anatoly got a hold of one of his classmates' teeth, and just like that, Natasha actually stopped tormenting him. Again, according to Anatoly. But although this issue was solved, Anatoly was still traumatized and now fascinated with death. This kiss that he had with Natasha, he actually started to think about and want to experience again. Anatoly eventually went to Moscow State University, where he studied language and history, which were the two things that he really excelled in. It really seemed like Anatoly was bound for greatness. He was very intelligent, he was getting an amazing education, he spoke so many languages, but what no one knew is that at the same time he was tormented by this want and need to be surrounded by the dead. So eventually Anatoly decided to pursue a career as a journalist and began writing obituaries. He thought this was a great gig because he would get to hang around cemeteries and write, and it was just a good way to kind of get away with chilling around cemeteries and be around the dead. It was also around this time that he developed a romantic relationship with a woman by the name of Yulia. This relationship did end up falling through, but what's interesting about it is that it was actually non-sexual. Anatoly preferred to avoid things such as drinking and any vices, so although they were romantic, it was more sort of like a soul tie or a friendship. Anyways, unfortunately, that relationship did fall through for them, but after that, he got the offer for his dream job. He was offered the job to travel all over Russia and visit cemeteries to analyze them and then further write about them. During this job, Anatoly said that he would walk 20 miles on foot every day and that he would sometimes even sleep in cemeteries. But he loved it. He loved feeling close to the dead. He loved feeling like they were right there with him. It was very bizarre. Also, FYI, at the time, Anatoly was still living with his parents. He just always wanted to live with them. It wasn't anything that he really ever wanted to change. So at this point, Anatoly was essentially living his dream life, having his dream job, and living life. So what could possibly go wrong? So in 2009, a bunch of locals began discovering their loved ones' graves being dug up or tampered with. They would literally go to visit their loved one's grave and find a hole in the ground. I mean, can you imagine how traumatizing that can be? Now, for 2 years, investigators really put in the work to try to figure out who this was, who was robbing these graves and taking people out of them. It was very bizarre and really creepy. I mean, people in the the town were not like happy about this, obviously. But the police never really had a suspect until November 2nd, 2011. It was on this day that police officers saw Anatoly in the cemetery tampering with one of the graves. Now, the police officers went up and started talking to him because they figured, we're looking for someone who messes with graves, and here is a guy who is messing with a grave. Now, I don't really know how this happened, but the police officers were talking to Anatoly and somehow they convinced him to take them back to his house. And that's exactly what he did. He openly took them back to his house, and when officers entered his home that he shared with his parents, they were instantly hit with the smell of something rotting. It was extremely intense, and they knew right away that something was not right. I think at this point they were kind of like, okay, this guy is guilty, we're gonna find bodies somewhere. But I don't think in their heads they could have imagined like to find what they actually found. As they searched the home, they discovered 26 dolls all over the house, scattered, put on shelves, sitting on sofas, posed like real people. And these dolls were wearing girls' clothes, and they were life-size dolls. Like, some of them were 4 feet tall, some of them were even like 5 feet tall. Big dolls. Some of them had ribbons in their hair, they wore makeup, and one of the officers decided to look further into one of the dolls because there was a lot of them, and it was just very bizarre. And you can guess what happened when he cut into the doll. It took them a minute to realize what they were looking at, but they realized that they were looking at mummified bodies that were basically dug up from the cemeteries and brought back into that home. The dolls that Anatoly was collecting were fully bodies. They were just masked to look like dolls. Among the actual bodies, they also found like instructions on how to actually build the mummies, and you can look that up. It's just so gruesome and gross, and I don't want to talk about it, but if you want to read about that, there's pictures and everything online that you can look at. I mean, this guy was very bizarre, and like, this is like terribly messed up. So obviously immediately he was arrested, because what the hell, dude, that is just not something you can do. You can't take people's dead loved ones and just bring them home. So when they arrested him, they did not end up putting him in jail because he was mentally unstable. Anatoly claimed that he genuinely felt sympathy for these dolls. He said that he would cook for them, he would celebrate their birthdays, he would sing for them, he would watch cartoons with them. He said that he treated these dolls as his daughters and his loved ones, and he had no intentions of hurting them. He actually said that by bringing them home and turning them into dolls, he was trying to help them, bring them back to life. Is that not absolutely insane? I mean, obviously this guy is genuinely nuts. Like, he has to be. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he suffered from a form of paranoid schizophrenia. He was also deemed unfit to stand trial, so he was released of all criminal liability. Anatoly is currently 55 years old. He is still alive, and to this day, he is still in that psychiatric clinic, thank God. And the crimes that he committed are really considered to be some of the most gruesome in Russia and even the entire world, because holy crap, it is absolutely insane what he did. It's impossible to ignore the severe childhood trauma that Anatoly experienced. I can't imagine the freaking trauma. That definitely had to have left a permanent scar on him, which in turn led to all these terrible things that he did. But I want to make one thing clear, nothing in his childhood, none of his traumas excuse his disgusting and vile behavior. He's a criminal and he needs to be locked up. Clearly he has psychiatric issues, so he kind of got the better end of the stick by like being released of criminal liability, which is crazy. Like, how do you just release someone of criminal liability? But then again, he was evaluated, so it makes sense. You guys let me know what you think of this story down below. I would love to hear your opinions and thoughts. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get?
What's up everyone, it's Jana, and today we're going to be discussing a case so bizarre and so twisted, it's going to leave you spinning in your seat. It's also really going to frustrate you because the perpetrators in this case are really smug and super arrogant, and honestly, I just hate them both. I am of course referring to the case of two cold-blooded psychopaths, Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper. These two, in an attempt to copy the horror movie classic Scream, did the unimaginable to a classmate of theirs on a September night in 2006 and documented their entire sadistic plan on footage. And today we're gonna dive right into the terrifying facts behind this case. So without further ado, let's get started. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 21st, 1989 and was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. Cassie and everyone else in this case attended Pocatello High School in Bannock County, Idaho. The community that she grew up in is said to have been primarily of the Mormon faith and to have been very safe, a very tight-knit community. Cassie was known to be a very kind, gentle, and responsible young girl. She was very loved by her family and is said to have been raised by her grandparents. I actually couldn't find as to why she was being raised by her grandparents rather than her parents, but by all accounts, Cassie did have an amazing childhood regardless. She had many friends who had amazing things to say about her. They said she was very creative and loved acting. Cassie was also a straight-A student, and the sheriff that was actually working her case said that Cassie wouldn't do basically anything other than attend school. She was just a very good kid all around and had a really good head on her shoulders. It really goes to show you how driven Cassie was. I mean, she was really just an amazing person and had the ability to bond and make friends with just about anyone. At the time of the crime, Cassie had also been in a 5-month relationship with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham. Her grandmother says that she had big plans for the future. She was excited to get her life started, and all of this was just destroyed by two idiots. On the night of September 22nd, 2006, Cassie had promised her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank, that she would house sit for them. The couple were going to be out of town for a bit, so they wanted Cassie to watch the house and the 5 pets that they had. Yes, they had 5 pets. They had 2 cats and 3 dogs. I know that's a lot, but again, Cassie was a very responsible girl, and they felt that she could handle watching the house for a couple of nights. So on that evening, as planned, Cassie drove to Whispering Cliffs Drive, where she was going to spend the rest of the evening house sitting. Everything was going smoothly around the house when around 6 p.m. her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, decided to come over. Now, Cassie, again, was just an angel of a girl, and she had made her aunt and uncle aware that Matt was going to be coming over. So just so we're clear, no sneaky business. They knew that he was going to come over. And so they're spending the night together, they're hanging out, and eventually Matt ends up inviting 2 of his other friends to come over to the house as well. And their names were, of course, Tori and Brian. Now, Matt was pretty good friends with the guys, but Cassie was more kind of just acquaintances. And when they came over, Cassie was kind of annoyed by it. She was hoping she was just gonna get to spend some time with her boyfriend, like they were gonna get to watch a movie, hang out, have a cute night in, and then these 2 idiots walk in, and she was just not having it. Regardless, however, they were there already, so she innocently gave them a tour of the house and showed them the basement right before all 4 of the teenagers decided to sit down and watch a movie. They decided to watch Kill Bill 2 because that's what was cool at the time. And while they're watching the movie, Tori and Brian suddenly say that they're bored and they want to go to a movie theater instead. That makes absolutely no sense. Like, you're bored from watching a movie, so you want to go to a movie theater to watch another movie? Clearly, these 2 aren't the smartest. But what's annoying about this story is that they think they're complete geniuses, and we'll get into that later. Anyway, so they say that they want to leave, but before they leave, Brian says that he needs to go and use the washroom. And while Brian was using the washroom, he was secretly unlocking the basement door so that they could later sneak back into the house. This was an elaborate plan made by the 2 of them, and it was about to unfold. Now, this is where the real horror of the night begins, as planned by Tori and Brian. So Brian and Tori leave, and the couple continue to watch the movie in the living room when suddenly they start hearing noises coming from the basement. Matt also said that he noticed the dogs were acting very bizarre around the basement and were growling at it. As quickly as the lights went off in the house, they did come back on, but by that point, Cassie was so freaked out, like she had no idea what to do. So much so that she actually asked Matt, like, hey, can you please spend the night with me? I don't want to be here alone. Obviously, because they were still young, Matt had to call his mom to ask for permission, and unfortunately, his mom said that no, he could not spend the night. However, his mom did say that if Cassie really did feel unsafe, she was welcome to go over to their house, and that she was even going to drop her off home in the morning. However, despite the offer, Cassie decided that she wanted to do the responsible thing and stay back to watch the house. It was just who she was. Cassie was not the type to break a promise. She was responsible. At approximately 10:30 p.m. that night, Matt's mom came by to pick him up, leaving Cassie all alone. However, what no one knew was that when their friends, Tori and Brian, left the house, they actually drove down the street and pulled over to prepare for the attack. The two boys quickly got into dark clothing, they put on gloves, and they even got these terrifying masks. They were these white masks with red paint splattered all over them to resemble blood. Absolutely terrifying. Tori and Brian then snuck back into the home and hid in the basement while the couple watched the movie. And all the banging and the noises and the blackout, all of that was caused by Tori and Brian trying to lure Matt and Cassie downstairs. They were hoping that Matt would come down first and then they would attack him and then move upstairs to attack Cassie second. However, this wasn't really going to plan because neither Matt or Cassie were coming downstairs. So when this was unsuccessful, they stopped with the noises, they turned the lights back on, and they just waited for Matt to leave. When they heard Cassie walk Matt out, they killed all of the lights in the house yet again, leaving her in complete darkness. So now she was home alone and in the dark, completely terrified. Coincidentally, at this exact same time, Matt actually calls Tori from his mom's car, and he says that he recalls Tori whispering, but he says he just thought it was because he was in a movie theater. Little did he know he was about to brutally attack his girlfriend. So the second power outage when she was home alone was another attempt to get Cassie to go into the basement, but again, she didn't fall for it. I mean, if I was home alone, I highly doubt I would be going into a pitch black basement. I think eventually Tori and Brian just realized that she wasn't gonna come down, so they made their way upstairs. When they got upstairs, they slammed a closet door really hard in an attempt to scare Cassie one more time, and then right off the bat just started brutally attacking her. This girl was so violently and so senselessly murdered, I can't even put it into words. When the attack was complete, they just left her there and ran away.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I her and I saw her body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck.
Cassie's body wasn't discovered until 2 days later on September 24th, 2006. And it didn't take long for investigators to figure out that Tori and Brian were the last people to see Cassie alive. The very same day, Tori was interrogated very heavily about his whereabouts. He was interrogated about the movie that he had went to see. He told investigators all about his day and how he went to the movie theater, but very quickly, when investigators started to press him for more details, he started to crack. It became evident that Tori had never went to see the movie with Brian because neither of them had any idea of what the plot of the movie even was. The investigators actually went to see the movie just so they can question them and see if they knew the plot. And of course, they had no idea what the movie was about. Very quickly, it was clear that the boys were lying about where they were. Tori tried to say that the reason he didn't remember the movie was because he was distracted by two girls sitting next to him. Obviously, they didn't buy this. I mean, the whole story was just starting to unravel. You can go see the full interrogations online. They're available on YouTube. Super interesting, but super long. If you're intrigued by this case, I really recommend you go check them out. 3 days later, Brian had led law enforcement officers to a stash of evidence that they had buried at Black Rock Canyon. In the stash of evidence were the costumes, the murder weapons, the masks, and a videotape in which Brian and Tori plan out the brutal attack of Cassie from beginning to end.
It was 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I locked the back doors. That's all locked. Now we just gotta wait.
In the videotapes, the two talk about wanting to become notorious, like the Zodiac Killer or Ted Bundy. You can tell that these two really want to be like kind of famous. They also mentioned being heavily inspired by the movie Scream, which is absolutely terrifying. The footage on these videotapes incriminates them to a point of no return. I mean, they very blatantly say that they did it and they wanted to do it and they were happy that they took her life. There was even footage of them planning the attack in the middle of class, and people would hear them talking about it, but they would just think that they were talking about the plot of a movie because the things that they were saying were just, I mean, too insane to be real. Both of them received life sentences without the chance of parole and 30 years to life on top of that for the conspiracy and the planning of everything, because it was just so brutal and cold-blooded and premeditated to like a concerning level. They're both now serving their time at the Idaho State Correctional Institution, and they will not be getting out of there anytime soon. These two guys are literal psychopaths. They're so freaking crazy. They're so evil. The fact that they were able to just so coldly and so senselessly take away a life for their own enjoyment and because they wanted to be like a movie. Movies are not real life. You can't just take someone's life and make a joke out of it. They wanted to make a name for themselves and they wanted to be famous and known, but this is not anything to be proud of. Ryan and Tori thought that they were gonna go down in history as these notorious serial killers, but in reality, they're gonna go down in history as cowards, because that's exactly what they are. They're cowards. And today I wanted to share with you the story of Cassie and just how terribly her life was taken from her way too soon by these two idiots. Please let me know what you guys think down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. How do you feel about what Brian and Tori did? Do you think that they got the sentence that they deserved? I would really love to know your opinions. I love you guys so much and I'll see you next time. Bye.